Season 2 of Kill Team brought an enhanced system of play in the form of close quarters with the release of Into the Dark, a tightly packed, brutal form of play that involves limited terrain, narrow hallways, and small rooms. The brutality within this system comes from not only sweeping changes to what teams can and can no longer do, but also adjustments in how cover lines work, as well as several shifts for attack special rules that make certain weapons way more powerful than normal. Before we get into it, thanks for watching. If you're interested in tabletop games like Kill Team and are new to the channel, maybe tap that subscribe button, maybe the like as well if you're interested. And know that we have a Discord community that is linked in the description below where we hang out, talk about rules, games we've played, as well as showing off any of our paint projects we're working on. With that said, let's take a look at the differences you will have to face when entering the narrow halls of the close quarters style map. The biggest element that comes from close quarters games are the walls themselves. They drastically change the method of play for all teams involved, limiting movements, measurement, and actions. And they exist as an immovable object, unable to be tinkered with or adjusted outside of specific narrative circumstances. But we'll be focusing on matched play maps and rules for this overview. All walls count as heavy terrain, and you have to consider that they lead all the way up to some kind of ceiling. There is no climbing function that allows units to pass over them, and characters with fly are similarly restricted by the wall's existence. A key element to them is that when measuring distances for abilities or attacks or certain rules, you must measure around the walls with the shortest possible distance. This is what that would look like. The Phobos Voxbreaker has a wall between itself and this legionary icon bearer in cover in conceal. The play it is looking for is to auspex scan the icon bearer and give this marksman the ability to treat it as having an engage order. In a straight line this works, and the ability doesn't require visibility to the enemy unit in the first place. However, from its current location, the measurement for this ability must go around the wall before being measured towards the icon bearer. This prevents auspex from occurring. By rule of thumb, if a unit must measure through a closed-off portion of wall for an ability, or to determine if it is on an objective or near a marker, it must measure around that wall at the shortest distance to see if it is within range. The only exception to this is when measuring to specific parts of the map for mission scoring purposes. Like the Security TAC Ops Central Control, it requires units to be within 3 inches of the map center, and that can be measured without any interruptions by walls. As well, despite their looks with the pillars that jut out every handful of inches, walls are considered flat on their sides for cover purposes. Only corners and the outer edge of hatchways provide heavy cover for units. I guess while we're on the topic of hatchways, these gates are key to every approach in close quarters style matches. Controlling their ability to be opened or passed through controls the flow of movement you or your opponent will have access to. When closed, a hatch simply is a wall. It is heavy and measurement can't normally be made through it. When open, several things occur. The hatch component must be swung to a full open state. No opening slightly just to get some vision. This hatch still has the wall trait, but it no longer affects the now accessible part of the wall. Let's start with a visualization. Even though there is a bottom and top to the new gateway, this whole area is now considered accessible. This area can provide no cover to units on either side. The outer edges will still be considered heavy terrain, however. As long as part of a unit's base passes through this area, it can use up to an inch to the left or right of the wall as though it isn't there. This means this Wormblade doesn't have to pass through the access point in the dead center if an ally is blocking part of the area. Now, let's tear through a couple examples to try and show how many actions and strategies interact with this access point. When a hatchway is open and a unit wishes to pass through, measurement of this move is taken as standard and is considered performable so long as the unit is fully on the other side of the access point when its move ends. No adding an inch to make the move possible. If the full movement doesn't allow for the unit to pass through, it must remain on the side it started on. And remember that its full base is able to pass through using the rules mentioned before. as units without fly or other special rules can't pass through their allies or enemies. Units can be used to block movement. These 2 legionary units would prevent this anointed from charging past into the room beyond. The positioning of these 2 Wormblade units would prevent this Phobos from entering their room. There are new actions that exist to help mitigate some of the tomfoolery-based tactics like hatchway blocking. Let's take a look at those now. Sticking with the Wormblade versus the Phobos example, let's get into the specifics. The Phobos Reaver is against the access point, but the Wormblade units are outside of an inch of it. Therefore, the Reaver can't use the regular fight action. The reason it can't charge is that the Wormblade bases would prevent the Reaver from fully standing on the opposite side of the wall. However, to do this, these Wormblade units have to stand within 2 inches of their side of the access point. Now, the Reaver could shoot at this point. It is completely viable, and the Wormblade units would not get cover from their side of the wall for that action, due to the Reaver's position. But this setup doesn't protect the Wormblade from the Reaver's knife. For 1 action point, Hatchway Fight can be used. It is considered a fight action and would fill that role for actions used in a turn. This allows the Reaver to target one of the enemy operatives and treat it as being within engagement range for the action. Normally, if both these Wormblade units were in engagement range of the Reaver, they would give each other melee support for +1 to the weapon skill check. As neither are truly within engagement range, this fight is only a one-on-one, no benefits for either side. Another action involves the opening and closing of the hatchway. This is also a 1 action point mission action that can be used to change the state of a hatchway. This being a mission action prevents a 3 APL unit from sitting on a door, opening it, shooting, and then closing it, as the specific mission action can only be taken once per turn per unit. To perform this action, the unit must be within an inch of the hatchway access point. It must not be within engagement range of an enemy, and if the door is open, an enemy must not be within 1 inch of the access point. This action is unique in that it can be performed during the full course of a dash or normal move. That is to say that if this Reaver wishes to move into this adjacent room, you can measure the part of the move that gets you within 1 inch of the access point, and then measure the rest of the move after triggering the action, be it moving past to open or close the hatch, moving through while opening, or even closing the hatch after getting into the room. All of these are possible. If you open a hatch and find your unit within engagement range of an enemy, your move must end in that moment, unless your unit has a special rule that lets it pass within engagement ranges of enemies, like fly. The third basic action introduced with close quarters is guard. It costs 1 action point and is considered a shoot action, so it would take up one of those functions during a unit's activation. This puts that unit in the state of on guard. Now, on guard remains on the unit until one of a couple things happens. It has to perform an on guard attack or any other action excluding pass. If an enemy ends in engagement range of the unit and no guard action is taken, if the unit has its order changed from engage to conceal, or if the turning point ends, you are unable to carry the state to another turn. The actions that can be taken in this state are used to interrupt enemy actions. Any action taken by an enemy during its normal activation can trigger this. Opening doors, moving, capturing points, shooting. Actions taken outside of an enemy activation won't trigger it. Things like the Wormblade Locust's Quicksilver Strike when it activates. Even other units that trigger the on-guard action or other Overwatch actions. When this occurs, you are able to perform one of 3 actions: an Overwatch, a free fight action, or something called a point-blank Overwatch. The first 2 are what you would expect. The Overwatch would consume the unit's ability to Overwatch once a turn and fire on the enemy, normally with reduced ballistic skill. The free fight action would allow the unit that is charged to potentially go first in a fight before the enemy can choose to fight. Point blank Overwatch allows the agent making the attack to fire on a unit in its engagement range, again at the usual reduced ballistic skill that Overwatch provides, unless other rules adjust that. This also prevents the unit from responding to any upcoming melee, so be careful with this. After performing the point-blank overwatch, if the enemy chooses to fight, the unit that used the on-guard action can't pick a melee weapon or roll at all in response to the enemy attacks until the end of the interrupted enemy unit's activation. A couple things to note here. 1. This heavy bolter legionary without any upgrades can't move and shoot the weapon. However, it could move, dash, and use the guard action, allowing it to use the heavy bolter as an on-guard overwatch. This gives many heavy weapon wielders a leg up in their mobility during close quarters missions. As a reminder, these attacks are overwatch attacks, so I do believe Unwieldy and Blast are unable to be used by an on-guard overwatch. Also, you don't have to target the unit you are interrupting. If this same legionary gunner sees an enemy Phobos Marine and is able to perform an overwatch shoot action on it, even after a Phobos Marine that it can't see uses an action, it could use its overwatch on the unactivated Marine. These actions open up whole new worlds of possibilities in the close quarters kill zone. Now, let's take a look at some of the rules adjustments that were made to the general Kill Team core rules to change the feel of the game. To start off real quick, if you are using Critical Ops TAC Ops, there is a download on the Warhammer community page that shows 2 replacement TAC Ops for the deck. As well, there are faction TAC Ops like the Legionary's Dark Desecration that aren't allowed in close quarters missions. Keep that in mind. When setting up barricades, the limit for their placement in close quarters is adjusted. They must be outside of 6 inches of the enemy deployment. They must be 2 inches outside of access points, and they must be 2 inches away from other barricades. They can also not be placed on terrain features unless considered insignificant. Several factions have their ploys changed for close quarters. If they have a ploy that allows a unit to set up outside of the kill zone, the rules for this are fully rewritten. For instance, the Wormblade have the ability to place 2 operatives outside of the kill zone to be deployed during the first turn in forward locations. This is changed. You will have to use the ploy at the end of the scouting step, and it will allow only one of the type of units specified to get a full move action, as well as a use of the Operate Hatch action before the turn begins. Several teams are affected by this. Several special rules for weapons are changed as well to match the claustrophobic nature of close quarters. Weapons with Blast, Splash, or Torrent all gain the Lethal 5 rule. If they already had this rule, or possibly a better version of Lethal, not much will change, but Flamers and other such weapons are far more devastating in close-range combat. Weapons with Indirect are considered to be a pseudo-dual profile weapon, one where Indirect is on and one where it is off. If Indirect is in use, the weapon gains the range limit of 3 inches for the attack, a slight nerf to grenades, but one that does feel necessary in these kinds of maps. Lastly, when drawing cover lines to targets, if those lines pass over 1 or more agents in engage, you must roll 1 less attack, friend or foe. Agents in conceal don't cause this to occur, and allies in base-to-base contact with the attacking agent don't trigger this as well. All these rules combine to create a tightly packed and potentially devastating kill zone that creates big swings in team power potentials by limiting very strong abilities and greatly improving abilities considered by many to be very weak overall. Hopefully, what we went over demystifies the Close Quarters Rules module for you. It might take a bit to adapt strategies you have gotten used to for your teams of choice in the normal open map setting. But from the games I've played, Close Quarters has the potential for some incredibly nail-biting matches, and is worth taking a look at for everyone that plays Kill Team. Thank you for checking out the channel. Do you have any fun stories from matches played in these darkened halls? Let us know in the comments below. And as a reminder, maybe check out that Discord link in the description. We'd be happy to have you. As always, likes for the like god and subscribes for the subscribe throne. I am Kimmerix, and I'll see you in the next one.